Imagine an army of silent guardians, dressed in simple robes, protecting the very blueprint of European civilization when the world outside descended into chaos. They weren't fighting with swords, but with tiny packets of seeds, ensuring that the flavors, medicines, and food security of the future were tucked away safely behind stone walls. The ashes of Rome and the sprout. When the Roman Empire fell and the great libraries turned to ash, the lights of civilization didn't just flicker out, they shrank, retreating behind high stone walls. For centuries of the Dark Ages, Western knowledge didn't rest on scrolls. It depended on a secret, quiet treasure kept safe inside a humble clay jar. The seed. As roads decayed and the central government vanished, the sophisticated agricultural network of Rome collapsed entirely. The chaos that followed meant survival depended not on trade, but on what one could grow. The monastery became the single most important anchor of stability in a turbulent world. This wasn't just about faith, it was about practical, organized self-sufficiency. Every viable seed represented a critical line of defense against famine and plague. The sisters, guided by monastic principles of labor and austerity, developed highly effective farming techniques that were more resilient than anything outside their walls. They didn't just tend the gardens, they meticulously cataloged, saved, and adapted the ancient grain, root, and herb varieties that had vanished from the abandoned fields of Europe. In their quiet courtyards, the very blueprint of European agriculture was being preserved, one tiny packet at a time. This simple act of tending the earth meant the difference between the complete starvation of the continent and the eventual rebuilding of societies centuries later. The legacy they were protecting wasn't merely spiritual or academic, it was the foundation of future food security. To understand this legacy, we have to look closer at their daily work. But what kind of devotion could compel someone to plant a garden designed to feed people 50 years in the future? The sacred rule of the soil. To truly understand the convent garden, you must understand the rule of Saint Benedict, the spiritual code that governed their lives. The core tenet was startlingly simple: ora et labora, pray and work. For the sisters, laboring in the soil was not merely a chore, it was a spiritual necessity, a direct path to humility, and a means of serving God through self-sufficiency. Every weed pulled, every row meticulously planted was a devotion. The rule dictated that a monastery must sustain itself, and this commitment to independence became the driving force behind the nuns' mastery of horticulture. They couldn't rely on fragile outside markets, which meant their gardens had to be biologically diverse and incredibly resilient. If one crop failed due to blight or bad weather, 5 others needed to be ready to take its place. This requirement for unwavering self-reliance forced them to become expert seed collectors, constantly selecting and saving the strains that performed best in their specific soil and microclimate. They became relentless field scientists, ignoring the pretty flowers and saving only the seeds from the toughest, ugliest, most pest-resistant plants. They didn't select for uniformity, they selected for survival and for flavor. The sister who worked the soil was practicing a form of ecological stewardship dictated by their faith. This deep practical connection to the earth became the engine for agricultural preservation across Europe. It was this commitment to work that led to the creation of the most important silent records in history, the scriptorium of the garden. Within the convent, the monks in the scriptorium bent over parchment, carefully illuminating the Word of God. But outside, an equally vital act of preservation occurred in the sunlight, recorded not with ink on vellum, but with tiny, careful notes attached to drying seed heads. This was the scriptorium of the garden, where the history of agriculture was silently documented by the hands of the sisters. For every batch of beans, carrots, or culinary herbs, a nun kept meticulous records, creating the world's earliest forms of botanical passports. These simple ledgers documented the seed's origin, the plant's performance, its resistance to disease, and its optimal harvest time. They recorded how many days it took to germinate and the best way to store the final yield. This was not abstract theology. It was knowledge for survival, allowing the next generation of sisters to understand which specific strains were adapted to their unique microclimate. While the world outside embraced newer, less reliable crop varieties, the sisters were busy selecting for the hardiness and flavor found in their heirloom strains. These quiet ledgers ensured that genetic failures were never repeated, and successes were guaranteed to persist. It's because of these careful records that we can now trace back the origins of certain disease-resistant strains of wheat and cabbage. We're talking about strains of wheat that possessed 9 times the nutritional protein of modern varieties. Lost flavors, documented only in a sister's handwriting. This silent, systematic approach to documentation kept the most ancient and flavorful grains alive, even when the rest of Europe forgot they existed. The forgotten taste of ancient grains. In the modern age, agriculture is dominated by vast fields of specialized wheat, bred for maximum yield. But step into a medieval convent field, and you'd encounter something tougher, smaller, and vastly more complex. These were the ancient grains, forgotten relics like spelt, einkorn, and emmer, strains the sisters deliberately kept alive, valued not for their bulk, but for their unparalleled resilience and hidden flavor. These grains offered a crucial advantage. They were better suited to the poor, often rocky soils surrounding monastic settlements. They required less water, resisted common blights, and possessed a high nutritional value that was essential during harsh European winters. The nuns understood that the very traits rejected by later commercial farmers, like tough husks or slightly smaller kernels, were the traits that guaranteed survival. While outsiders chased easy profits, the sisters focused on genetic wealth. They maintained several varieties of the same grain, ensuring that if one strain succumbed to disease, others would persist. Their steadfast devotion means that today, when modern agriculture struggles with diminishing soil health, we look back to these monastic strains for answers. The nuns weren't preserving history. They were keeping a future available in every kernel, and the same dedication they brought to growing staples, they applied to the herbs that kept their community healthy. The Sister Apothecary's Cabinet. Long before prescription bottles and pharmaceutical factories, the convent's infirmary was the most reliable source of medical care for surrounding settlements. But the skill of the sister in charge, the apothecary, was worthless without the dedicated, meticulously curated physic garden that grew outside her door. She was a master herbalist, whose entire medicine cabinet was rooted in the soil, treating ailments from minor wounds to deadly fevers using nothing but carefully preserved plant strains. This garden was sacred ground, far more complex than the average vegetable plot. The nuns grew European herbs like comfrey to knit broken bones, chamomile for restless sleep, and mullein for respiratory issues. Crucially, they became experts in preserving the most potent strains of these medicinal plants. Unlike market growers who prioritize volume, the sisters would select seeds only from plants displaying the highest concentrations of therapeutic compounds, ensuring the medicine's effectiveness was never diluted across generations. Generations of selection turned a simple herb patch into a living lab, where the essential oils of their mint or the tannins in their oak bark were demonstrably stronger than anything found in the wild. They weren't just saving plants, they were preserving the pharmacological knowledge of the age, making sure the right species and the right genetic line were always available. The sister apothecary's commitment to quality meant her plants were often the last reservoir of powerful, localized heirloom medicine. Their tireless work in one part of the garden was designed to heal the body, but another section was designed to sustain the community for decades to come. The long vow of the asparagus bed. Modern farming often operates on an annual cycle, seeking instant gratification. The nuns, however, cultivated a principle far more profound: multi-generational patience. Nowhere was this more evident than in the asparagus bed, which was never seen as a temporary crop, but as a 50-year vow of sustenance. Asparagus is not like most vegetables. It takes a full 3 years of careful tending and zero harvesting before the roots, or crowns, are established enough to produce a viable yield. During that time, the sisters invested labor without seeing any immediate return. This waiting period was a powerful lesson in faith and foresight, requiring them to plant not just for themselves, but for the sisters who would follow them decades later. Once established, however, the bed rewarded their patience handsomely, yielding tender spears every spring for a half-century or more. They meticulously maintained these patches, using ash and manure to enrich the soil, ensuring the patch lasted well beyond the lifespan of the person who planted it. The asparagus patch was a living metaphor for monastic life, a commitment to quiet, long-term stability over fleeting gains. It's one thing to have patience with the soil, but it's another thing entirely to try and force two separate living trees to grow together as one. That required the mind of an engineer. The craft of the grafted fruit. The convent orchard was a living testament to the nuns as horticultural engineers, masters of a skill that few modern gardeners possess. Their apples, plums, and pears were not grown from random seeds. They were kept alive through the delicate, precise craft of grafting, a kind of botanical surgery that ensured the continued life of irreplaceable heirloom fruit. The process required patience and a steady hand. The sisters would take a small, fragile cutting, or scion, from a tree prized for its flavor or hardiness, and meticulously bind it onto the strong rootstock of a tougher, more resilient tree. This fusion allowed the rare and often temperamental fruit variety to thrive, safe from the diseases and harsh climates that would otherwise cause its demise. By constantly grafting, the nuns preserved fruit varieties that commercial growers later abandoned for being too susceptible to bruising or having a short shelf life. They selected for taste, for adaptability, and for unique qualities that have since vanished from the modern supermarket. It is because of this careful annual labor that some of Europe's oldest and sweetest apple varieties still exist today, tucked away in obscure regional archives. Their deliberate rejection of mass-market uniformity was also key to how they handled the most essential ingredient of all, the seed itself. The quiet resistance to hybridization. As agriculture modernized, commercial interests began producing hybrid seeds, strains bred for uniformity, but with one major flaw: their offspring were sterile. To plant again, farmers became dependent on buying new seed every season, breaking a millennia-old cycle of self-sufficiency. The nuns, however, quietly performed an act of botanical resistance, refusing to sever the sacred chain of life. The sisters chose to cultivate only open-pollinated heirloom varieties, seeds that naturally breed true to type and could be saved and replanted endlessly. This was a direct, although silent, rejection of the commercialization of food. They understood that the power to control their own harvest and the ability to share those seeds freely was fundamental to their spiritual independence and the security of their community. By maintaining open-pollinated seeds, the nuns ensured that life, the freedom to plant and eat, could never be bought, sold, or centrally controlled. They kept the genetics free. By rigorously selecting and isolating the best plants year after year, they enhanced the hardiness and purity of their strains, adapting them perfectly to the convent's ground. The garden became an organic democracy, a living repository where genetic material was freely passed down, a radical contrast to the proprietary seeds emerging in the outside world. This small act of devotion to traditional seed saving ensured that valuable, diverse strains remained common property. Their dedication to the life-giving nature of the seed also extended to the ancient techniques they used to keep them watered. The buried clay pot, ancient wisdom. Before automated drip systems and complex piping, the nuns employed an ingenious ancient form of irrigation, a system so simple and effective it often appeared magical: the buried clay pot. This technique, involving unglazed ceramic vessels known as ollas, was a masterclass in water conservation, a crucial skill in regions prone to long, dry European summers. The process was elegantly straightforward. Sisters would bury the porous clay pots deep into the garden beds, leaving just the rim exposed, and then fill them with water. The magic happened as the water slowly, silently seeped through the porous clay, directly into the surrounding soil. Plant roots, sensing the moisture, grew towards the pot, drinking precisely what they needed. This method minimized evaporation drastically, saving up to 70% more water than surface watering, and encouraged deep, healthy root growth, making the plant stronger and more drought-resistant. It required no energy, zero moving parts, and represented a profound understanding of natural physics. The nuns used this wisdom to make the most of every precious drop of rainwater, ensuring their crops survived even the harshest droughts. That same strategic wisdom guided their planting decisions when the outside world collapsed into chaos. The secrets of the victory. Cabbage. When famine or conflict swept across Europe, the convent walls didn't guarantee safety. They guaranteed one thing: a strategic food supply. During these periods, the sister gardener became a military strategist, and her secret weapon for surviving lean, bitter winters was the humble cabbage. It was a crop of unparalleled resilience, able to sustain communities when all others failed. The nuns meticulously cultivated varieties of cabbage, rutabaga, and hardy potatoes that were selected, specifically for storage and tenacity. They weren't growing fast, flashy vegetables. They were growing calories that could be salted, fermented into sauerkraut, or stored in root cellars for months without spoiling. This foresight meant that the convent often became a crucial point of relief, able to provide sustenance to desperate neighbors seeking help. By preserving specific locally adapted strains of storage crops, the sisters ensured that even if a summer harvest failed, the winter stores would carry them through. This was an agricultural form of civil defense. Their skill wasn't just in planting what tasted good, it was in planting what survived the worst of times. The sisters' deep knowledge of hardy genetic lines ensured that the community always had a buffer against disaster. It was the security of these silent walls that also created the perfect conditions for unparalleled botanical diversity. The silent walls of enclosure. The towering stone walls of the convent were built for spiritual enclosure, meant to separate the sisters from the distractions of the secular world. But in a quiet twist of fate, these same walls provided the perfect biological isolation, safeguarding a fragile botanical inheritance. Isolation, in this case, was the key to unparalleled genetic diversity. Because the nuns were cut off from the pressures of commercial markets, they were never forced to choose crops based on what sold well, traveled easily, or looked uniform. Instead, they selected for the uncompromised qualities of flavor, aroma, and localized hardiness. They could afford to keep a variety of apples that might bruise easily, or a specific type of bean that produced a small yield but tasted superior. This singular focus on utility over commercial viability led to an enormous concentration of unique genetic lines within a small space, all perfectly adapted to the convent's specific microclimate. While the outside world was slowly moving toward the uniformity of monocultures, the convent garden remained an ecological fortress, preserving thousands of specific traits that would have otherwise been lost to the homogenizing hand of commerce. These walls preserved a rich past, and that past was packaged up and carried by the sisters themselves as they traveled. The seeds that traveled with faith. As monastic orders felt the call to spread their faith, the sisters didn't travel empty-handed. Tucked inside the folds of their habits, alongside prayer beads and relics, were small, carefully labeled packets of seeds, the essential plants needed to establish a new garden and a new foothold for their community in unfamiliar lands. They were not only spiritual emissaries, but also botanical pioneers. When a new convent was founded, whether high in the Alps or across the sea, the sisters carried with them the genetic blueprint of their civilization's sustenance. They brought tough, well-adapted European seeds that ensured they could immediately begin practicing self-sufficiency, often planting the first formalized European gardens in distant regions. Conversely, they also became crucial conduits for botanical exchange. When they arrived in a new place, they keenly observed and collected local, useful plant varieties, testing them and integrating the most successful ones back into the established monastic system. This cross-pollination of knowledge allowed ancient European strains to survive in new climates while incorporating the hardiness of local species. The expansion of the orders was, in effect, a controlled and highly effective seed distribution network. Without these tireless journeys, many localized strains of wheat, cabbage, and medicinal herbs would have remained confined to one small region, vulnerable to catastrophe. Their meticulous planning was the foundation for a year-round system that defied the seasons. The art of the perpetual harvest. The convent garden could never afford the luxury of a feast or famine cycle. It had to be a meticulously managed engine of continuous yield. The sisters practiced the art of the perpetual harvest, mastering a complex year-round system of planting and storage that kept their community fed from January to December, defying the harsh rhythm of the European seasons. This required a profound level of planning known as succession planting. Instead of planting all their peas or cabbages at once, the nuns sowed small batches every 2 or 3 weeks. This practice extended the harvest window dramatically, preventing a wasteful midsummer glut and ensuring a steady flow of fresh food. Furthermore, They had to cultivate and preserve specialized varieties for different times of the year. Early ripening rhubarb and spring greens, midsummer beans, and tough, late storage root vegetables. Every inch of soil was maximized, often employing cold frames and sheltered walls to push the boundaries of the growing season in both spring and fall. Their mastery of this endless cycle meant that the pantry was rarely empty, a crucial defense against starvation. This deep, centuries-long library of practical knowledge is now proving invaluable to those studying how to revive lost flavors and forgotten resilience. The rediscovery of the ledgers. Today, many modern agricultural systems are struggling with uniformity, disease, and the relentless pressure of climate change. For answers, botanists and heritage farmers aren't looking forward. They're digging backward, treating old convent archives like gold mines. A sister's 17th century notes on a disease-resistant bean or a particularly sweet carrot hold the key to flavors and hardiness thought to be extinct. These simple, often unbound ledgers, once kept only for internal monastic use, have become vital records of genetic diversity. Researchers compare the notes on optimal growing conditions, flavor profiles, and resistance to pests specific to localized regions in Europe. For instance, a record detailing a specific strain of wheat that thrived during a particular medieval blight might hold the coating needed to fortify modern crops against a new, devastating fungus. Seed banks and permaculturists have successfully resurrected strains based entirely on these forgotten monastic archives, bringing back flavors and robustness that haven't been tasted in centuries. The sisters never sought credit for this documentation, yet their meticulous record-keeping provides an irreplaceable resource for securing the future of our food supply. This quiet, persistent labor wasn't about preserving the past as a museum piece. It was an accidental time capsule holding the keys to the genetic diversity that will protect our entire global food chain in the 21st century. The silent vow of the future. The work of the seed keepers was always rooted in an ethic that transcended seasons and harvests. The nuns never saved seeds for recognition, fame, or profit. They engaged in the fundamental, quiet act of guaranteeing the future. They understood that the tiny, humble seed was far more than a potential plant. It was the blueprint of history and the key to humanity's ongoing survival. For hundreds of years, this dedication ensured the genetic wealth of Europe's food supply. While the outside world sought uniformity in the quest for market efficiency, the monasteries held on to diversity, preserving the hardy, unique, and disease-resistant strains that modern agriculture is now scrambling to recover. When a blight strikes a monoculture field today, experts look to the sisters' carefully preserved lineages to find the resistance needed to stop the spread. Their patient labor was the most profound form of ecological stewardship, guaranteeing that the fundamental ingredients of life would survive societal and political instability, economic pressures, or changing tastes. The simple lesson of the seed keepers is that resilience is found not in size, but in diversity, a truth now more vital than ever as we face a changing climate. And they prove that one woman, with a handful of seeds and infinite patience, can be a silent guardian for every one of us. If the history of food security fascinates you, hit that like button to help this story reach more people, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of forgotten knowledge.